Good morning, everybody. Welcome. How y'all feeling this morning? Good. Welcome to church. If I didn't get a chance to meet you, my name is Pastor Justin. I serve as the executive pastor here, and I'm honored this morning to be able to be here and to be sharing with you guys. So before I get started, I know Taylor and Austin mentioned it, but if this is your first time here, I want to welcome you to church. We hope that in our prayer at the Heritage Co. is that everybody that walks through our doors, they feel at home when they come to church. So hopefully this morning, when you walk through or when you came in the parking lot and came through the front doors, through our foyer area, if you check kids in, we wanted you to feel at home. So hopefully you felt that this morning when you come to church. Before I get started, I have a couple things I got to clear up. For those that were here last week and worshiped with us, it'll make sense, all the laughter, in a minute. Pastor Austin opened with a story about yours truly on a ride that him and I shared together several years ago at the state fair. Actually, it was Aiken County State Fair, yeah. And everything he described about the ride was accurate. It was as crazy as it was as long as he described it. It was as just hectic and crazy and long and arduous as he described, but there was a point that he left out. And the butt of the joke was me, because I did, when I got off the ride, I happened to pee my pants. All that's true, I'm not denying it, but he failed to mention the real reason why that happened. Okay, granted, he explained we were holding on for dear life on this ride. Most fair rides are like 20, 30 seconds. This was at least 5.5 minutes, had to been. And so I'm holding on for dear life for these 5.5 minutes, but beside me is a 6'4", 225 lean cut grown man, your lead pastor, screaming like a 5-year-old girl. For 5.5 minutes, he screamed, and I'm telling you, when the laughter, it was like that deep. When I got off the ride, my stomach hurt, my chest hurt. I was laughing so hard because our lead pastor was screaming like a girl for 5.5 minutes. And every ride we done that night, he screamed like a little girl. So, yeah, I still peed my pants, but he screams like a little girl on the ride. So I was thinking this week about, I've known him for 20 years, and there's a lot that I could have brought up, but I had to protect him this morning, so I went easy on him. But if you find me in the foyer, I got more for you. So we've been in this marriage series the last couple weeks called Crazy Little Thing, where we're looking at the idea of how marriage and love is crazy, right? It calls us to do crazy things. And how many of you enjoyed it so far? All the singles are like, God, another one. I got to listen to another marriage series. That's right. One more week. But I believe if we look at what God has for us this morning, we could all glean something from it. But yeah, we've been in this marriage series where we're talking about how love and relationships and marriage can lead us to do crazy things, or it's a crazy ride. And I come across a story this week when I was preparing that there was a couple, husband and wife, that lived in a small village in India. And this husband and wife were out one day, and the wife actually had fallen off a cliff while they were out walking. And she sustained pretty terrible injuries. And the only way that she could have survived is to get medical help. She needed immediate medical attention. But the closest place to get that was a city on the other side of a mountain. And her husband couldn't get her over the mountain in time, and she passed away from her injuries. And because this husband loved his wife so much, he didn't want anybody in the village to ever have to endure that again. So for the next 22 years of his life, he hand-carved a path over the top of this mountain, paved a road so that everybody in the village would have access to medical care, because love drove him to do something crazy for his wife in remembrance of her. And so the first week of our series, Pastor Jody preached on the power of love and how true love sees and gives value, and how true love sacrificially gives, and true love transforms and it redeems. And he painted this picture through the life of Jesus, the death and burial and resurrection of Jesus, of how we can see that power of love. And then last week, Pastor Austin preached on how to heal a broken marriage, and he gave us just some practical things that we can implement in our relationships in order to begin to put the pieces back together, like giving grace or showing honor, pursuing each other, and sharing a vision. And if we do those things, if we have brokenness in our marriage, we can begin to put the pieces back together and heal that broken marriage. Well, this morning, I want to talk to you about kingdom marriages. I want us to take a look at what I believe God's purpose for marriage actually is. And if we were to ask everybody in this room, even if you're single, if we were to ask everybody right now, do you want a terrible marriage? Do you want a terrible relationship? Do you want a terrible dating? None of us would say, yeah, that's me. I mean, it'd be strange, right? If you're like, I set out just to have a terrible marriage. That was my goal in life, was to have a terrible marriage. You wouldn't say that, right? But can you imagine what those vows at a wedding would sound like? It might sound something like this. I, insert your name because I'm not going to do mine. I begrudgingly take you, my awful wife, to use and abuse from this day forward for lesser and lesser. For richer or you better not become poorer. If you're sick, stay away until death do I part you. That would be terrible, right? If you showed up to a wedding and those were the vows that they shared, it'd be terrible because no one sets out to have a terrible marriage. And I venture to say that part of the reason why marriages fail today, especially within the church, is that couples don't have a true understanding of why God created it. For us to understand God's design and his desire for marriages, we must first have a solid foundation of why God created marriage in the first place. And I think that foundations, they're critical. Foundations, if they're not solid, they can lead to cracks and problems, and they begin to occur. When Blakely and I moved to Lexington, we bought a house, and I spent the first 3 months in that house renovating it. And so now when I sit around the house, I'm always looking at things, right? How can I make it better? Or how does this look? Or could I have done a better job here or there? Like I'm always evaluating my house. And I was sitting on the couch one day, and Blakely was sitting by the fire, and I started looking at the fireplace. Now our fireplace is painted all black. All the trim, my whole house is stark white. If you've ever been to my house, everything's stark white, and then the fireplace is black. And so Blakely's sitting by the fireplace, I'm sitting on the couch, and we're talking, and I start to look, and the caulk joints in the trim on my fireplace were starting to crack. And I could see the white caulk poking behind the black paint. And I got a little concerned. And I looked up, and the crown molding in my living room, again, the caulk joints where it meets the wall and the ceiling began to separate a little bit. And I walked up the stairs, and all the places where the trim would meet, all the caulk joints were showing signs of separation. And immediately I got concerned because, hey, this is my house. But to me, that was an indication that something might be wrong with my foundation. And we all know that foundations are what no one looks at, they don't pay attention to. It's not the pretty part of the house. But without a good foundation, without a solid foundation, cracks can begin to occur. And that's what I thought was taking place on my house. And so for us to have a firm foundation in our marriage, we must first have an understanding of why God created it. Here's a news flash, a crazy idea. God did not create marriage so that you would be happy. Everybody gasped. Like, really? That's right, yeah, God, when he created marriage, happiness was not his first concern. Happiness is not the purpose of marriage, but it is the benefit of marriage. And see, when we swap the benefit for the purpose that God created it, then our foundation can begin to crack. You see, in our relationships, when communication starts to break down, cracks begin, our relationship begins to crack. When financial strain hits the house, when we can't do the things we want to do, or buy the new pair of shoes, the new golf club, or take our kids here, or when the car breaks down, you don't have the finances to fix it, or when the AC goes out and it costs you an arm and a leg and you don't have it, and financial strain hits the house, the relationship can begin to crack and break down. When you and your spouse aren't spending as much time together because you're rushing kids here and you're rushing kids there, or jobs taking you here and there, and you're just going all over the place. And then at night you sit down and you got 20 minutes with each other and you're on your phone scrolling or on, watching something. You're not spending quality time together. The relationship can begin to crack. See, when the foundation of our marriage is based on our happiness, things start to break down. When we think the purpose of marriage is to make us happy, we're not aligned with the purpose that God created marriage for. Genesis chapter 1, verse 26 to 28, I think it'll be on the screen. I think it gives us that purpose. It gives us the design that God created our marriages for. And so Genesis chapter 1, I'm going to read it to you, verse 26 to 28. It said, "Then God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish in the sea, and over the birds in the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. And God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish in the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and every living thing that moves on the earth." You see, when God created man, he created man and woman in his image. We are the image bearers of God. When he created us as male and female, he created us to be a portrayal of who he is and to reflect his image. And I would submit to you that even in verse 28, when he says God blessed them, the first union of man and wife, the first marriage, if you will, he designed that marriage to be a reflection of who he is. And so after he blesses the marriage, he gives them purpose. So he says, God blessed them, and he said to them, he gave them a commandment, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. I don't know about y'all, but growing up in church, I always thought, well, you get married, you have a bunch of babies. Like that's what multiply meant growing up. But I would submit that what we're seeing here is that God is saying, I created you to be my image bearer. I created you to be a reflection of who I am. And I created this marriage between Adam and Eve to be a reflection of me. And I want you to go multiply that. I want you to take this marriage and the image that you have of me, and I want you to multiply it. I want you to build my kingdom. I want you to advance my kingdom here on earth and multiply it. Who are we multiplying? Ourselves. We are the image of God. And I believe our marriages are a reflection of that. See, God wants our marriage to be a reflection of his image that then is multiplied out into the world. And see, but every time we try to do something that's God-centered or that God's kingdom being advanced in, there's always something that's going to be in opposition, right? There's always something that's going to come and attack. His name's Satan. And he'll stop at nothing to keep God's kingdom from advancing. That's his mission, is to keep God. No city or house divided against itself will stand. And so Jesus is telling us that anytime there's division in a household, it won't stand. Or in a kingdom or in anything, when there's division, it won't stand. And Satan just wants to get in and start creating some of those cracks. He wants to get into your marriages and start just creating just some division. Because all he has to do in order to do that is get you to focus on the benefit that we talked about earlier, your happiness. If Satan can get you to focus on your happiness and not your purpose, then he can start to create those cracks. Because all that stuff I mentioned earlier is going to happen, right? Life's going to happen. You got kids. All that stuff is real and it's happening and it's part of your life. And he just wants you to focus on how you're not happy in it versus the purpose that God created it for, which is the advancement of his kingdom. So this morning, I believe if we work on the purpose of our marriage, the benefits that we all seek, the joy, the happiness, the fulfillment, the love that we all seek in our marriages, if we focus on the purpose, I believe those benefits will come and we'll have a kingdom marriage. Throughout Scripture, there are several couples that you can look at that have what we would call a God-centered marriage, or couples that were advancing God's kingdom. Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, Hosea and Gomer, and the list could go on, right? But this morning, I want us to take a look at a very obscure couple in the New Testament. Not a lot written about them, but I believe if we look at their life, it would reveal to us how to have a kingdom marriage. How can we have that kingdom marriage? So this morning, I want to introduce you to a couple named Priscilla and Aquila. Everybody say that with me. Priscilla and Aquila. Aquila is just fun to say. I just wanted y'all to say it with me because I've been practicing it all week, and Aquila is just a fun name to say. Unlike Justin, it's boring. But Aquila's fun. And so I believe if we examine their short recorded history in the New Testament, that we can get a glimpse. We can start to get a glimpse as to how to have a kingdom marriage that's focused on the right purpose. And I think if we're focused on the right purpose, and again, it'll lead to the joy and happiness that we all seek. So we are introduced to them in Acts chapter 18. In Acts chapter 18, I'm going to read it to you, and then we'll break it down. But it says, after this, Paul left Athens and went to Corinth. And he found a Jew named Aquila, a native of Pontus, recently from Italy, with his wife Priscilla, because Claudius had commanded all the Jews to leave Rome. And he went to see them, and because he was of the same trade, he stayed with them and worked, for they were tent makers by trade. And he reasoned in the synagogues every Sabbath and tried to persuade Jews and Greeks. So in chapter 18, we're introduced to our couple, our marquee couple, our power couple, if you will, for this morning. But to set the story up, Paul's on his missionary journey. He's cruising around the Mediterranean. And before we get any grand ideas, Carlos and Diane, this isn't the Oasis of the Seas or the Mardi Gras. He's not eating filet and lobster. I know y'all like cruises. I'm going on a cruise tomorrow, praise God. But that's not what he's doing, right? He's on a fishing vessel, probably in the belly of this vessel, smelling like fish, eating what scraps he can, sleeping in a fishing net, hopping from town to town around the Mediterranean. And so he leaves Greece and he lands in a town called Corinth. And when he gets there, like most of us, if we go to a new city, or if we go to just put yourself if you go to a business conference, right? You're going to be attracted to the people that are like you. You're going to find people that are in your similar niche. If you're a lawyer, you're probably going to find the other lawyers. If you're a banker, you're probably going to find the other bankers. Well, when Paul lands in Corinth, he's like, well, all I know how to do is preach the gospel and make a tent. So he goes and he finds the people that know how to make tents, Priscilla and Aquila. And so he meets up with them, and we see Paul, he's Airbnb in it with Priscilla and Aquila and living with them, it says, for many days. And I can imagine what they're seeing. Just put yourself in their shoes. They've invited this guy into their home, and every day they see Paul. Probably during the day he's making tents, but at night he's trying to reach people, and he's discipling people, and he's telling people about Jesus. And on the Sabbath he'd go into the synagogue, and he would try to persuade Greeks and Jews to follow Jesus. It says in verse 4 that he reasoned in the synagogues every Sabbath, and again, trying to just convince people of this gospel that he had been trying to advance, the gospel of Jesus. And we see in verse 18, we'll read in a minute, but Paul's getting ready to leave. And all day and night, Priscilla and Aquila are seeing this, and they watch Paul give everything for the sake of the gospel. And I think it began to stir something. The reason I know that is because, again, in verse 18, Paul's about to leave. He's leaving Corinth, and he's going to go to this next place called Ephesus. And when Paul leaves, this time he's not alone. This time when Paul sets out for his new city, Priscilla and Aquila, they go with him. You see, the couple that were just ordinary old tent makers in Corinth, now they see something they want to pursue together. They have a purpose for their marriage, the spreading of the gospel alongside Paul. Now they're on mission together. They're tapping into the purpose that they were created for, not just their happiness. Because I can imagine for them, if you think about it, they have a profession, they're in a town, they're making ends meet. It probably wasn't the easiest thing to pick up and go hop in the belly of a fishing vessel and go with Paul to the next town, not knowing what's going to be waiting there. So I'm sure it wasn't happiness that drove them there. It was a purpose that drove them to want to join Paul. Because the happy thing probably would just been sit, make tents, and give a little bit to the church and just live their normal life. But they began to be on mission together, which is my first point this morning. To have a kingdom marriage, we have to prioritize Jesus. In order to have a kingdom marriage, we have to prioritize Jesus and the advancement of the gospel that he wants in his kingdom here on earth. That has to be our purpose. So if you want a kingdom marriage, prioritize Jesus. How do you do that? How do you prioritize Jesus? It might look like you and your spouse join in a life group. Austin and Taylor talked about them. Maybe you haven't taken the step to join a life group, but if you want to start putting Jesus first in your marriage, join a life group. Life groups are just opportunities we can get together, build a relationship with other people in the church, grow in our relationship with them. As we grow in our relationship with Christ, we can share our struggles with each other. We can celebrate. We can bear each other's burdens, as Scripture says. That's what life group's about. We're not designed to do this thing on our own. So if you want to prioritize Jesus in your marriage and your relationship, get in a life group. Start serving on the home team. Every morning I get here, I'm the first one here, unlock everything, and I start to see people trickle in, and it just does something for me when I see families come in, husband and wives come in together serving this church, because I believe that whether they realize it or not, that's doing something to their marriage. It's giving them purpose. They're serving the church together. Or maybe it's you pray about how you can support this church financially through your family, and you want to start giving to the church, and as a family, you sit down and figure out, how can we do this? Can we even do it? Is this something God leading us to? But what happens is when you start doing these things that glorify God and elevate his purpose in your marriage, that's when you can have a kingdom marriage. And so my second point this morning that we see Priscilla and Aquila do, to have a kingdom marriage, you have to prioritize each other. So first you have to prioritize Jesus, and secondly, you have to prioritize each other. There's only 4 or 5 references of this couple in the New Testament. Once in Acts here, in Romans, which we'll read in a minute, in 1 Corinthians, and then in 2 Timothy. That's the only time they're mentioned. But when they are mentioned, it's never apart. Priscilla and Aquila are always together. You don't ever hear about Aquila doing something by himself or Priscilla doing something by herself. They're always together. And they work together to advance the mission. They knew that they were stronger together than they were if they were separate. And so when Paul leaves to go to Ephesus, Aquila doesn't say, Priscilla, I'm going to leave you here to make tents and keep our life together. I'm going to go off and do this thing. They go together because they wanted to do this together. They prioritized each other. And so when they get to Ephesus, Priscilla and Aquila, they start the first church in their home. And we see that theme run throughout their whole story, that even as short as it is and what little bit we have in reference of them, their whole mission is together. They're always together. They're always valuing each other and doing this thing together and prioritizing each other in the midst of it as they, alongside Paul, proclaim the gospel. I shared with the church before, if you're new, you might have not heard the story, but in 2017, me and my wife, we were expecting our first child. His name was Decker. And in 2017, she went to the hospital and found out that his heart had stopped. She was 37 weeks pregnant. and his heart had stopped. And she called me. She didn't want to divulge that news over the phone. She wanted me to hear it in person. So she called me and said, hey, you just need to get to the hospital. But what I didn't know is while I was traveling to the hospital, immediately after finding out this news, Blakely looks up and she looks around all the nurses and doctors and she said, I need someone to pray for me. I need someone to pray for my marriage right now. And praise God, there was a doctor in there that was of the faith and took her by the hand and started praying for our marriage. You know, in that moment, Blakely could have, in the grief and the destruction and the questions, she could have been, why God, why me? Why is this happening to me? I thought you loved me. Like she could have had, rightfully so, she would have had all those emotions. But her first priority was me and our marriage. You see, she knew that the enemy would want to attack our marriage through this tragedy. She knew that this would be something that we would have to do together. And from the time she found out, her response was, would someone pray for my marriage? I want to put my marriage first. She prioritized our marriage in that moment. I found out later on that 80% of couples that lose a child, they end up in divorce. And I just think that because of her foundation and what she did early on in that situation, it gave us strength to carry it on. And we were, I don't say we handled it perfectly, but I believe God was glorified in the story. As tragic as it was, God was glorified because we were together on this mission to advance his kingdom, regardless of what had happened to us. And because she set a foundation of prayer for our marriage, she prioritized us. So if we want true happiness in our marriage, we have to have a kingdom marriage. And a kingdom marriage prioritizes each other. So how can we do that? What are some practical ways we can prioritize our spouse? I believe Ephesians 5 gives us that answer. Ephesians 5 and verse 25, to the husbands it says, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for it. Men, we're to love our wives as Christ loved the church. And you know what he did for the church? He hung on a cross. He died for it. So every day we're to pick up our cross, we're to die for we're to sacrifice, we're to serve our wives, we're to love them, we're to show them that we love them as much as Jesus loved the church. How can we do that? It could be simple. Picking up after yourself, taking out the garbage, taking her out to dinner. Hey, babe, I got the kids tonight. You go to Starbucks, sit there, enjoy some quiet. I'm gonna watch the kids tonight. Or, bringing home flowers if she's, my wife doesn't really care for flowers, but some of y'all might. So it might be bringing home flowers. So those are some of the practical things, right? Find out what your spouse, husbands, find out what your wives enjoy and do that for them. Show that you love them. And ladies, verse 33 of that same passage says, however, let each of you love his wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband. See, guys are given the command to love their wives. Wives are given the command to respect their husbands. So what does that look like? I know that could get touchy, but what I believe is that in verse 33, when it says to respect your husband, what does that look like for us or for you guys as ladies? Building your husband up, giving him compliments. I tell my life group leaders all the time, if you want something to be repeated, celebrate it. And so if you want something in your husband to be, if he's doing something that shows you that he loves you, celebrate it. Babe, you look good when you take out that garbage. Man, you're doing great. Like, celebrate it. He'll want to do it again. The way you prayed for our family tonight, babe, I just love when you do that. When you take ownership and you pray for our family, or, when you went outside and played with the kids. I know you were busy at work, but when you played with the kids, I just loved when you do that. Build your husband up. Proverbs 31 is the virtuous wife passage. Many of you may be familiar. There's a whole ministry, Proverbs 31 ministry around the virtuous wife. And in that passage of scripture, the writer of Proverbs is talking a lot about how to be a virtuous wife. And there's a lot of things. She gets up early and does all these things for the kids and for the house. And it's all these little nuggets of wisdom for a virtuous wife. But in the middle of that passage, the writer of the Proverbs says that her husband is well known among the gates. Now, the gates in that time were just an area of commerce. It was an area of the city that had the most influential people. It's where government happened. It's where law happened. It's where commerce and trade and all the influential people were at the gates, right? And so what I don't believe that Proverbs 31 is saying is, in order to be a virtuous wife, you got to marry someone that's well known. But I think what it's saying is that when a virtuous wife is at the well gathering water with the other women, she's building her husband up, not tearing him down. When she's in the city center gathering for the family and buying and selling and trading, she's like, hey, y'all see my husband, what he's doing? Did y'all see how he led that? Did you see how he prayed for that family? Did y'all see how my husband did that? She's building her husband up. I believe that's what Proverbs 31, that passage in particular, is about. Because here's the reality. Men, we're to love our wives because ladies, they need to feel it in here. Women, we're to respect your husbands because we need to feel it up here. And so let's prioritize each other in our kingdom marriage. Let's not think about our own needs, our own desires, but let's think about our spouse and how we can love and respect them. Tim Kimmel, in his book, Grace-Filled Marriage, says that one of the highest representations of the image of God is a husband and wife serving each other. And that's what we're talking about. That was the foundation we set earlier, right? That we are the image bearers of God and our marriage should reflect God. And he's saying that the highest representation of that is a husband and wife serving each other. So if we want to have a kingdom marriage, let's prioritize each other. And the last thing that we see Priscilla and Aquila do is, in order to have a kingdom marriage, you have to prioritize others. I mentioned earlier, Romans 16 is another passage where we meet Priscilla and Aquila. And it says in Romans 16, 3 and 5, it says, "Greet Priscilla and Aquila, my fellow workers in Christ Jesus, who risked their necks for my life, to whom not only I give thanks, but all the churches of the Gentiles give thanks as well. Greet also the church in their house." You see, Priscilla and Aquila gave their lives in service of other people. We see that they prioritized Jesus. We see they prioritized each other. But when you look at the details of their story, they prioritized others every step of the way. It says that all the churches of the Gentiles give thanks to them. I don't know how many churches that is, but I just know that if it's a ton of churches, that all those churches are giving thanks to Priscilla and Aquila. They must have done something for other people, right? The first house or the first church that was ever founded in Ephesus was founded in their living room. They gave their lives in service to other people. They knew something that I think if we could grasp a hold of would radically change our marriages and our relationships and our community. They knew that they were put on this earth to serve others. Matthew chapter 20 and verse 28 says that just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. And so if, again, we're to be the image bearers of God and of Jesus, Jesus didn't come to be served. He came to serve others. And see, Priscilla and Aquila, they knew this, and they saw Paul doing this each and every day. They would give their lives to this mission. And we don't have the details, but in that passage that I read earlier, that Priscilla and Aquila together, they gave their life, they risked their necks for Paul in the advancement of the gospel. I don't know what that looked like, I don't know the details, but Aquila didn't say, "I got it, girl, I'm gonna go do it," or he didn't push Priscilla out there. They did it together. They risked their lives for the sake of the gospel alongside Paul, because they knew that they were there to serve others. You see, when our marriages prioritize others and together in unison, we can focus on others, it brings us together. I bet right now, if you and your spouse after church said, we're going to try this, and you went over to downtown to the Oliver Gospel Mission, and you started serving meals, hot meals to the homeless, I believe that you and your spouse in that moment, something would spark. You'd feel different when you left because together y'all were able to serve people that were less privileged than you. You were able to serve. You did something together, and I believe that would bring you together. See, so how can we prioritize other people? You could serve hot meals in a soup kitchen, or you can invite your neighbors. You might have neighbors that you're trying to get to know. You can invite them over to the house, grill some burgers, make some food, serve them when they come. But when you're there, just have a simple conversation about who God is. It may be a simple, "Hey, tell me about how you grew up in church." It don't have to be this deep theological study of Romans. It could just be, "Hey, tell me about your upbringing in church." And it begins to open the door for your ability to be able to pour into their life and learn their background and learn them and start to serve them and invite them into church. You might can keep somebody else's kids for them while they go out on a date. Or better yet, pay for them to go out on a date while you keep their kids. There's a couple back home, some really good friends of ours, Brandon and Zoe Sizemore. After we had lost Decker and we got pregnant again with Charleston and had her, they had been struggling for several years to have a child, and they had gone through the whole process that many of us know, and the struggles with it, and they'd finally gotten pregnant. And when they did, early on, they found out that something wasn't going to be viable, and they weren't going to be able to, the pregnancy wasn't going to last. And because of what Blakely and I have been through, we were there for them, right? We knew what they were experiencing. We knew what they thought. We knew, we could go to their house and just sit and let them vent to us. We knew the triggers. We knew everything that they were going through because we had experienced it. And in gratitude and in service to what we had done for them, which was just be good friends in our opinion, but what they wanted to serve us. And so one night they arranged a babysitter. I think they stayed with Bill and Laurie, or Charleston did. And they sent us downtown Augusta. Got us a room at a hotel with a rooftop. We sat and ate dessert over a rooftop and looked out over Augusta. And they sent us to dinner at a place called Frog Hollow, which if you've never been to Augusta, go to Frog Hollow. It's fantastic. But they just wanted to serve us. They knew that what we had done for them, they wanted to appreciate it, but they wanted to serve us. And so they did that for us. And so this morning, what are our priorities? Let's prioritize others in our marriage. Another thing that I tell life group leaders in discipleship and spreading of the gospel, a lot of times it can be difficult. It's not always easy. Rarely is it easy. And I tell leaders a lot of times that if God's prompting you to do something, if it's the difficult thing, it's probably the right thing. I can't tell how many times leading a group that I get a call at 10:30, 11 o'clock after group's over, and the couple's like, we're fighting about this, that, and the other, and I'd have to go over and sit in their apartment till midnight, knowing I got to get up at 4:30 the next morning, go and sit and just listen to them and talk with them, because again, God didn't call me to be comfortable, he called me to lead people. And so I would go do that. Or when Blakely's friend, her boyfriend's moving out, and all of his friends ditched him. I got all these buddies, they all ditched him. When moving, right, no one wants to move, but all his friends ditched him. I had to go help this guy I'd never met move. It led to me being able to baptize him a year later. But again, if it's the hard thing, it might be the right thing to do. And so let's prioritize others. So what are our priorities? Are you so focused on the benefits of marriage that you've forgotten the purpose that God created it for? Are you so wrapped up in what the other person's doing that you're not seeing what's going on in your life? If you want to find true happiness in your marriage, then you have to have the right priorities. You have to prioritize Jesus. You have to prioritize each other. And you have to prioritize others. So this week, I want to challenge you. 3 simple things I want to challenge you this week. Find ways you can do that. Find ways in your marriage or in your relationship, even maybe in your friendships if you don't have a relationship, that you can prioritize Jesus. What that might look like for a married couple when you lay down in bed at night, grab your spouse's hand and pray out loud over them. Maybe not something that you normally do, but do it. Prioritize Jesus in your marriage and see if something doesn't begin to spark. Prioritize each other. Find something that your spouse would appreciate and do it. Even if they don't reciprocate, still do it. And see if things don't start to change. And then prioritize others. Find some way, like I said, it could be simple. It doesn't have to be profound. Just find a way to serve somebody this week together as a couple and see if it doesn't change something. So next week, as Austin and Taylor said, we're going to be doing a Q&A session. I'm super excited about it. We'll be on stage with myself and Blakely, Pastor Austin and Taylor, and Pastor Kim and Mr. Lee. And we'll just be answering your questions. I don't know if y'all can throw that graphic back up, but we'll just have an opportunity to answer the questions that y'all have submitted. And so if you haven't already, submit questions. We'll do our best to answer those in the time that we have to the best of our ability. But I'm super excited. It's something different. We've not done this before, so I'm super excited just to see what God does in that short time we have next week. So if you haven't done that already, submit your questions. I'm going to get you guys to stand. I'm going to pray and close this service out. And then we'll close out in worship. So.